We met in college, in that awkward but hopeful place where youth still masks its desperation with the illusion of control. She was a year behind me, studying literature while I was drowning in business analytics and caffeine. We collided in a bookshop, me buying a copy of Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle to seem more interesting. And she, genuinely lost in a world where words mattered more than results. Her laughter that day was light, a contrast to the heavy monologues that filled her favorite novels. It caught me off guard. I never really stopped listening for it after that. 5 years later, we married under a sky so blue it felt fictional. It was the kind of wedding people post online to pretend their lives are movies. Small vineyard, linen suits, a string quartet playing Coldplay's Fix You with violins. It was perfect, not perfect like fairy tales, no. Perfect in the way you remember smells, textures, warmth, tangible, real, at least, I thought it was. 3 years into the marriage. Things were stable, that's the word, not thrilling, not stormy, just stable. She worked from home editing manuscripts. I climbed the ladder in a mid-sized firm, selling software that helped other people climb their own ladders. We talked over wine at night. We laughed over old memes. We folded laundry to indie playlists. There were arguments, but they were civilized, more like policy debates than emotional eruptions. If there were cracks, they were hairline, too small to see, too familiar to fear. And then, there was the circle: Tom, Ryan, and Jake, the three constants, my brothers in everything but blood. We met the first week of college orientation, thrown together by random dorm assignments and a shared obsession with late-night ramen. We were 4 wildly different personalities: Tom, the loudmouth charmer who majored in flirting more than any academic subject; Ryan, the stoic philosopher who could turn a beer pong night into a Kierkegaard discussion; Jake, the artist, who painted sadness into color and was always too cool for the room; and me, the glue, the narrator, the observer. Our friendship survived bad relationships, bad grades, lost jobs, broken noses, and one particularly disastrous camping trip that involved tequila, a raccoon, and a hospital visit we all promised never to speak of again. They were at my side through heartbreaks I thought I'd never recover from. I helped Jake through a nervous breakdown in junior year, slept on the floor of Ryan's studio apartment when he lost his job, and drove Tom to every court date when he got a DUI in our senior year. We didn't just bond, we bled into each other's lives. When I introduced him to her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I wanted her to know them, not just because they were important to me, but because I believed she would understand why. And she did. From the beginning, she had a way of fitting into spaces without displacing anyone. She didn't flirt with them, at least not openly, but she knew how to laugh at Tom's jokes in a way that made him feel brilliant. How to ask Jake about his art without making it feel like small talk. And how to sit quietly with Ryan when he needed silence more than words. One night, maybe a year into our relationship, she said something that stuck with me in a way I didn't understand until much later. "It's beautiful, what you have with them," she said, like I'm watching a language I'll never quite speak. "But I love hearing it. Thank you for letting me sit near it." It was poetic, classic her, and at the time, I felt proud, like I had built something sacred that she admired. But now, looking back, I hear it differently, as if she knew even then that she was inside something she didn't belong to. And instead of staying outside, she'd eventually find a way to rewrite her role. The truth is, when you trust someone enough, you stop looking for threats. You assume everyone who laughs with you laughs for you, not at you. You assume shared history is enough to keep boundaries intact. That's the lie. That's the comfort zone betrayal needs to grow. Tom was the first to start treating her too casually, arms around her waist during group photos. Inside jokes that didn't include me, calling her late at night for book recommendations. Jake, who once claimed monogamy was a capitalist myth, suddenly seemed very interested in her editing projects. Ryan, quiet, disciplined Ryan, started offering to drive her places when I was working late. "She hates public transit," he told me, But she never did before. I didn't notice. Or I noticed. But I rationalized. Because that's what we do with the people we love. We rewrite the evidence until the story fits our desired ending. I didn't see it as a pattern. I saw it as coincidence. As chemistry. As harmless familiarity. I trusted them. With everything. I trusted her. With my name, my heart, my future children. The thing about circles is they protect you. Until they close around you. And when they do, you don't even feel the cut until it's too late to stop the bleeding. That barbecue was supposed to be just another night of jokes and beers. Just another celebration of what we'd survived together. But sometimes, laughter echoes differently depending on who's laughing, and why. That night, one word broke the illusion, babe. And for a second too long, no one corrected it, and I, the narrator of my own quiet life, suddenly realized I might have been the only one who thought this was still my story. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday, sun, smoke, and stories. One of those weekends where time slows down just enough to let nostalgia breathe. We hadn't had a proper gathering in months. Everyone's schedules had splintered into different directions, adulthood having carved us into fragmented versions of who we used to be. So when I suggested a barbecue at my place, just the four of us and my wife, the response was immediate, even enthusiastic. It felt like returning home, even if none of us were where we started. The backyard was nothing special. A small wooden deck, a grill that had seen better years, folding chairs with mismatched cushions. But with the right music and cold beers, it became sacred. The smell of charcoal, the faint sound of an old playlist echoing from my Bluetooth speaker, Kings of Leon, Arctic Monkeys, and that one throwback by MGMT, gave the space a kind of rhythm that only memory can compose. My wife was radiant in her effortless way. She wore the floral sundress I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years ago, the one with the soft blue petals that moved like watercolor when she walked. She knew how to dress for an audience without seeming like she was trying. Her hair was tied in a loose knot, a few rebellious strands brushing against her neck when the breeze caught them. She was barefoot, comfortable, at home. Tom arrived first, as usual, carrying a six-pack and a grin too wide for someone who was 20 minutes late. Ryan and Jake followed soon after, arms full of chips, burgers, and a bottle of that overpriced whiskey we'd all agreed to stop buying after college but kept bringing out for special occasions. The grill hissed and spat as I dropped the first batch of burgers onto the flame. Smoke curled into the sky. Conversations picked up where we left them years ago. As though nothing had changed. We fell into our usual roles, Tom the showman, Ryan the skeptic, Jake the artist, and me, the quiet observer, the stage manager of this four-man show. We laughed, loudly, stupidly, like we hadn't been broken by the real world yet. Stories were told with the rhythm of ritual, embellished, recycled, but never old. We brought up the time Ryan got locked in the library overnight. The road trip to Reno that ended in an accidental stop at a wedding chapel. The infamous tequila-fueled karaoke night where Jake tried to sing in French and somehow summoned security. My wife laughed the loudest. She always did, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. She liked being around them. She liked how alive I was when I was around them. I had always found comfort in that. Until now. Because now I remember how she leaned forward when Tom spoke. How she poured Jake's drink without him asking. How her hand lingered for a second too long on Ryan's shoulder when she passed him the plate of ribs. It wasn't overt, nothing you could accuse, just frictionless familiarity. And then it happened. We were mid-story, Tom retelling. For the 100th time, the night he snuck into a rival fraternity's house dressed as their mascot. Everyone was roaring. The music had just faded into a quiet interlude. And as the laughter peaked, Tom turned to her and said it. Come on, babe. I mean, haha. Bro, your wife's hilarious. The words hit like a dropped glass on tile. Not loud, but sharp, fragile. Everyone froze, not in shock, but in calculation. A pause just long enough to be noticed. Ryan took a sip, drained his glass in one go. and pretended to admire the grill's smoke. Jake, who was wearing open-toed sandals, looked down and bent over to tighten imaginary shoelaces. My wife didn't flinch. That was what hit me hardest. She smiled, almost too easily, and reached for her beer. "You guys never let him finish a story," she said, light as ever, but her eyes didn't meet mine. I laughed, or at least, I made the sound I thought a laugh should be. My hands moved automatically, flipping burgers, brushing marinade, opening another drink. I felt distant from my own body, like a delayed echo of myself. Tom tried to move on quickly, changed the subject to the latest football scores. Ryan argued a stat. Jake brought up an art show downtown. And just like that, the moment dissolved, on the surface. But I knew, or rather, something in me shifted, like a clock that ticks 1 second too late. Something was wrong, not in a movie scene way, not with thunder or close-ups, but in that deeply human way you feel when you walk into a room and everyone's been talking about you and they just stopped. Later that night, after everyone left, the house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. She asked if I was okay. I said I was tired. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and went to brush her teeth. I stood in the backyard for a long time, looking at the coals. They still glowed faintly, pulsing in the dark like a dying heartbeat. I told myself it was nothing, that people slip up, that Tom has always been reckless with words, that I was being paranoid. But I knew, not with proof, not with certainty, but with the kind of knowing that sits in your gut and grows teeth. The barbecue had ended, but something else had started, and I wasn't ready for the fire it would bring. I laughed, or at least, I performed the action. The sound escaped my throat with enough volume and timing to pass as amusement. And no one questioned it. But inside, something subtle and corrosive had begun. A shift so faint it could have been mistaken for wind, or hunger, or fatigue. It was doubt, the slowest kind of poison, the most rational of assassins. That night, after the barbecue, the house was quiet, too quiet, not the kind that invites rest, but the kind that watches you, the kind that listens back. She was brushing her teeth, humming something familiar and safe, something from the playlist we made the first year we moved in. It used to make me smile. Now it sounded like a lullaby sung by someone who no longer believed in dreams. When she came to bed, she kissed my cheek, curled up beside me, and fell asleep within minutes. I waited, eyes open, heart still, body pretending. Her breath evened out, slow and gentle. She looked peaceful, innocent, beautiful. I hated that I noticed. At 2:43 a.m., I slipped out of bed. I walked barefoot to the living room, not turning on the lights. The blue glow of the router, the standby blink of the TV, the faint moonlight leaking through the blinds, those were enough. I sat down with my phone, not for revenge, not even to find anything, just to look, to make sense of the growing noise inside me. I started with Tom. We had a group chat, me, him, Ryan, and Jake. It was mostly memes, weekend plans, football predictions, the digital equivalent of locker room banter, stretched across adulthood. I scrolled back through years of chatter. Nothing obvious, until a photo. It was taken during a weekend trip to the lake house. Tom and my wife, sitting on a porch swing. Her face turned toward the camera, mid-laugh, his arm casually across the backrest, but his hand wasn't on the swing. It was lower, just barely on her hip. Subtle, but the fingers were curved, not flat. The touch wasn't accidental. My stomach didn't drop, it tightened. I enlarged the photo. Her body language, neutral, but her eyes, they weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at him. I closed the app. Ryan had once borrowed my phone. A year ago, when his own had died during a hike. He'd logged into his Instagram. I remembered because he'd posted a blurry story of a pinecone and captioned it, "Existential Armor." Classic Ryan. I checked. His account was still cached. I tapped in. Password wasn't needed. The DMs were orderly. Ryan was precise, analytical. He didn't flirt. He inquired. He questioned. He observed. But one conversation stood out: his messages with my wife. Short sentences, no emojis, minimal punctuation. It looked innocent to an untrained eye. But tone betrays content. You can feel emotional temperature in digital ink. Dinner was lovely. Your touch is always surprising. He doesn't know. Right, I couldn't tell. Tuesday works. Same place. The messages were months old. Before the barbecue. But not ancient, not forgettable. I stared at the words. I read them again, out loud. They didn't change. They didn't soften. I logged out. Jake was the hardest. He was private, paranoid. Even in college, he used burner accounts for social media. Privacy is the last rebellion, he used to say. He also believed monogamy was a social construct invented by feudal lords. But he respected mine, or so I thought. I remembered once, he left his second phone at my place after a party. It buzzed for hours until he came back, laughing, brushing it off as his junk device. But I'd seen the screen then. The Telegram app. Dozens of messages. Names I didn't recognize. One name I did. I downloaded Telegram, created a dummy account, and searched her number. It was there. Their chat. Unlike Ryan, Jake was all emotion. Raw. Descriptive. Thinking about how you tasted last week. Send a photo with your hair down. Just like when we were in the studio. Do you think he suspects? I didn't screenshot. I didn't save. I just stared. The screen dimmed. I let it. I sat in the darkness. The phone heavy in my hand. My thoughts weren't loud. They were sharp, focused. Not on confrontation. Not on fury. But on patterns. How long had this been happening? Was it sequential? Simultaneous? Did they know about each other? Or was I the only common denominator? The host of a cruel inside joke. My wife shifted in bed. I heard her call my name softly. Half asleep. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, stared at myself. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because pain needs clarity, and I was still swimming in static. I returned to bed before the sun rose. She turned toward me, draped her arm over my chest, and whispered, "I love you." It sounded like a question. I didn't respond, but I knew my silence had already begun to speak. And the doubt, it was no longer a question. It was the only truth I had left. There's a difference between suspicion and confirmation. Suspicion keeps you up at night. Confirmation builds a casket for your peace of mind. Doubt lets you wonder, but truth kicks in the door and changes the architecture of your soul. After that night, after I read those messages and stared into the abyss of everything I didn't want to believe, I couldn't stop. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I observed. My life became a quiet investigation, where the subject didn't even know she was on trial. I started tracking time. Tom, Ryan, Jake, each of them had their season. Tom's was the easiest to uncover. I had been in New York for a product launch. A grueling 4-day trip filled with pitch decks, espresso shots, and executive handshakes. I remember calling her every night from the hotel, half expecting to hear loneliness in her voice. She always answered sweetly, with warmth, as if waiting for me was the easiest thing in the world. But the house security app told a different story. I checked the log for the front door. His name, Tom H., had signed in using the guest code I'd given him months earlier. The entry was logged at 11:07 p.m., the same night I called her from the hotel bar, and she told me she was just finishing a book in bed. 2 hours later, a motion alert in the living room, at 1:34 a.m., then another in the hallway at 2:05, then nothing until 10:12 a.m., when the front door opened again. All benign, unless you knew what you were looking at. Unless you had the context of hands too low in photos and voices too quick to apologize. I didn't ask her about it. Not then, because I wanted to know more. I wanted to know how deep the hole went before I started filling it with consequences. Ryan's season came next. A colder time. I had been hospitalized with a ruptured appendix. A dull pain turned into a sharp nightmare. And within hours I was under anesthesia. She was by my side for the first 2 days. Held my hand, whispered reassurances, fed me ice chips, told me not to worry, said she cancelled all her meetings to be there. On the third day, she said she needed to go home for a few hours, change clothes, take a real shower. I told her I understood. I kissed her hand and said I'd be fine. That night, from my hospital bed, I checked our shared Google Calendar out of boredom. Her entry said, "Yoga 7 p.m. Strange, she hadn't gone to that class in months. I opened the calendar history. The event had been edited that morning. The original entry had said, "Dinner with Ryan." I remembered the text from Ryan a day earlier, "Hang in there. Man, you've got a strong woman." I had thought it was encouragement. Now I read it as a coded confession. Jake's season was the darkest. I had flown back to my hometown alone. My mother had died, sudden, unexpected, a brain aneurysm, the kind of death that feels like a joke when you first hear it. I told my wife she didn't have to come. She had deadlines. She said she'd stay and take care of things at home. I told her I'd only be gone 4 days. Jake came to the funeral, not because he knew my mother well, but because he knew what her death meant to me. He stood with me, he cried with me, he said all the right things. When I returned home, I found a receipt in the kitchen trash. A boutique hotel not far from our place. 1 night stay, room service included. The date, the third night I was gone. Jake's cologne was unique, spicy, musky, impossible to miss. That scent lingered in the hallway. Faint, but real. I began stitching the pieces together. Not speculation, not paranoia, but time-stamped truth. Tom came when I was working. Ryan came when I was vulnerable. Jake came when I was grieving. They didn't overlap. Not that I could tell. But they filled the spaces of my life with precision. As if she had created a calendar not of commitment, but of opportunity. What haunted me more than the betrayals themselves was the realization that each of them seemed to believe they were the only one. Their messages, their behaviors, the subtle possessiveness, they didn't read like conspirators. They read like lovers in denial, like men convinced they had been chosen. She made him feel singular, which meant she was an artist of deception, a curator of intimacy. She gave each man a version of herself tailored to their needs, and maybe that was the scariest part. Maybe none of them ever saw the real her. Maybe I hadn't either. I began to wonder what stories she had told them about me. Was I the inattentive husband, the cold workaholic, the emotionally unavailable partner who just didn't get her? Was I the villain in their version of her life? And if I was, how many others believed it? Confirmation didn't give me clarity. It gave me fog, because once you see the web, you start pulling every thread, every compliment, every kiss, every quiet sigh. You question it all. Was that night at the beach genuine? Was the way she looked at me on our wedding day real? Did she mean it when she said I made her feel safe? Or was I just the security system she built her double life around? I stopped speaking at dinner. I started watching her more closely. She didn't notice, or if she did, she mistook it for detachment. One night, she even asked, "Are we okay?" I said we were. She smiled and kissed me. I counted the seconds her lips stayed on mine. 5. Long enough to fool anyone. Even herself. Confirmation, I learned, isn't an end. It's a doorway, a transition from uncertainty to despair, from suspicion to strategy. And as I stood at that threshold, I didn't feel rage. I felt ready, not for revenge, for silence. Because sometimes, silence is the most articulate response to betrayal. And mine had just begun. Goodbye doesn't always sound like slammed doors or shouted accusations. Sometimes, it sounds like nothing, no raised voice, no storm of anger, just a quiet closing of chapters that once seemed infinite. I didn't scream, I didn't demand explanations, because I realized something deeper than betrayal. It was the futility of words. What could they say that I hadn't already rehearsed in my mind 100 times over? What story could they spin that would make what happened vanish? Or even shrink? Instead, I became a collector, a quiet archivist of my own unraveling. I spent the next 2 days alone. Not in isolation, but in study. I went back through every message, every photo, every timestamp. I mapped them, not with rage, but with a sort of cold reverence, like a detective at a crime scene, cataloging not just the evidence, but the motive, the psychology, the patterns of the wound. I took screenshots, every text from Tom where he used words I used to think were mine. Every half-nude selfie Jake had sent her, angles so carefully posed they almost seemed proud. Every poetic line Ryan had written to her, the same man who once read my vows before I stood at the altar. I saved the photos into a single folder on my desktop. I titled it, Lessons. Then I wrote one sentence. Thank you for everything you taught me about friendship. I sent it to all three of them. No attachments, no preamble, just that. Almost immediately, the typing dots appeared. Tom's first, then Jake, then Ryan. I didn't read what they wrote. I blocked them before the messages landed. I didn't need to hear excuses dressed in desperation. I didn't want explanations that tried to turn lies into misunderstandings. I didn't block them out of hatred. Hatred still requires space in your heart. What I felt wasn't hate, it was vacancy. Emptiness isn't violent, it's indifferent, and that's what I had become toward them, indifferent. The act of blocking someone isn't loud. It's almost surgical, a clean cut, final, and oddly satisfying. I sat in the kitchen afterward. Phone turned face down, watching the kettle boil for tea I wouldn't drink. I thought about the last times we were all together. Birthday parties, beach trips, lazy Sundays spent playing cards. I wondered if those memories were real or if they had been staged. If I was the only one who didn't know I was in the audience instead of on the stage. My wife was upstairs, showering. The sound of running water filled the house. It used to comfort me. Now it just filled the silence between pulses of clarity. I didn't go to her. I didn't confront, because I had already said goodbye. She just didn't know it yet. Goodbye, in this form, isn't a moment. It's a progression, a melting away of emotion. Like snow sliding off a roof in spring, inevitable, quiet, irreversible. I packed a small bag. Just clothes for a few days. Some toiletries. My laptop. I didn't slam drawers or leave notes. I didn't want to give this exit the performance she might have expected. I stood in the doorway for a while, looking at the hallway where we used to slow dance after dinner. The stairs where she sat and cried after her first miscarriage. The living room couch where we binged shows and shared popcorn and laughter. Memories are stubborn. They don't leave when people do. I stepped out into the cold evening. The street was calm, the way cities get late at night when even the dogs have stopped barking and the streetlights hum to themselves. I drove to a friend's empty apartment. He was traveling. I had his keys. I didn't call him. I just let myself in and sat on the unfamiliar couch, staring at the silence. It was there, in that stillness, that I allowed grief to visit. Not rage, not even sadness, just grief, like a visitor knocking gently, asking to be let in. Grief is funny. It doesn't always cry. Sometimes it just watches, quietly, waiting for you to notice it's taken a seat beside you. I laid down, still in my clothes. I didn't sleep, but I rested. The kind of rest that comes when the fire is finally out and all that's left is the ash. The next morning, I opened my phone. 3 messages, from her. The first, "Where are you?" The second, "I'm worried." The third, "Please talk to me." I didn't reply. I didn't block her, not yet, because this goodbye needed to echo. Not shout, just echo. Later that day, I returned to the house. She was sitting on the couch, still in pajamas, eyes red from crying. She looked up and ran to me, but I didn't raise my arms. "I don't understand," she said. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her for a long time, long enough to make her look away. And then I said, very softly, "Because words didn't save us. They won't save this." She sobbed, fell to her knees. I didn't comfort her. Instead, I walked past her, into our bedroom, and gathered the rest of what I needed. I didn't slam doors. I didn't leave a note. As I turned to leave, she whispered, "Please, just tell me why." I paused, then I said the only thing that made sense. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing. And I walked out. That was my goodbye. No rage, no revenge, just release. The end didn't come with fireworks or fanfare. It came in the soft erosion of presence, in the gradual silences where conversation used to live. In the empty spaces between morning coffee and eye contact. I didn't announce it, I didn't argue, I didn't even mourn out loud. I simply disappeared, piece by piece. 3 months passed after the confrontation that never really happened. She tried. At first, she cooked more, she touched me more, she initiated conversations, tried to laugh like before. But it was performative, and perhaps more tragically, it was late. Love doesn't vanish overnight, it decays. And the version of me that once believed in the sanctity of us was already dead by the time she noticed I'd stopped saying goodnight with intention. I answered her questions with brevity. I touched her only out of habit. I responded to her affection like a statue reacts to weather, patient. Unchanged, unmoved. In those 3 months, I became a ghost, not the kind that haunts, but the kind that forgets how to be seen. I began to plan. Not an escape, not a revenge, just an exit that honored the pain without weaponizing it. I consulted a lawyer, quietly, chose someone who specialized in dissolution without litigation. I asked about timelines, assets, emotional shielding. I wanted it clean, not cruel, just irreversible. I moved my things slowly. Books first, then small items from drawers. No big suitcases, just small absences. Like a stage being disassembled while the play still runs. She didn't notice at first. Or maybe she did, but chose not to admit it. Each night I lay beside her, pretending sleep, listening to the rhythm of someone still trying to salvage a ship that had already sunk. I found the old photo one evening, tucked in a worn envelope labeled College Memories, in my desk drawer. It was from our senior year. A candid shot, the 4 of us, me, Tom, Ryan, Jake, arms slung over each other's shoulders. Wide smiles, cheeks flushed with beer and invincibility. We looked like the future had already been conquered. And I remembered how she had taken that photo. She had been standing across the lawn, wearing my hoodie, barefoot in the grass, laughing at our antics. I remember her saying, "This photo will age like wine." It did, just not the way any of us expected. I scanned the image, printed a copy, sat at the table with a black ink pen and circled the other 3. 1, 2, 3, their faces, once familiar, now reduced to symbols of absence. Symbols of a lesson carved in skin. Beneath the image, I wrote a single line. Sometimes betrayal doesn't knock on the door. It has the spare key. It felt truer than anything I'd ever written. More precise than any poem. More final than any goodbye. I slid the photo into the front of a small leather album. Inside were other moments. Our wedding photo. The keychain from our first apartment. The train ticket from our anniversary trip to Prague. All relics. All evidence. Not of love, but of what love can survive until it cannot. I left the album on her pillow that morning. The divorce papers were neatly stacked beneath it. Signed, final, simple. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I didn't linger for tears or questions. Closure, I had learned, isn't something you ask for. It's something you create when you stop asking. I drove away before the sun rose. The sky was still dark, as if shielding the world from the clarity of this departure. There was no music in the car, just the hum of the engine and the breath of someone who had finally exhaled. That drive was different than the one I took months ago. The night after the barbecue. The night silence first whispered its truth. Back then, I was lost in fog. This time, I was moving through air. Clean, uncluttered. Later, she texted. Of course she did. Why? I didn't respond, because sometimes the answer doesn't belong in words. It belongs in silence. In the spaces we create when we finally honor ourselves more than the stories we were desperate to maintain. I rented a small studio apartment across the city. Sparse furniture, a window facing east. I watched the sunrise every morning for the first 2 weeks. I wanted to remember what beginning again felt like. Not hope, exactly, but honesty. I didn't call my former friends. Their numbers were gone, their presence erased like chalk washed by rain. Not with anger, just intention. Forgiveness came slowly, and not as a gift to them. It came as a favor to myself. A release from carrying weight that wasn't mine to begin with. In time, I began to fill the silence with new things. Not distractions, not replacements, but real things. A new plant, a new song, a new version of myself. Still fragile, but mine. Sometimes, I looked at the photo again, the one with the circle and the sentence. Not to reopen the wound, but to remind myself that trusting isn't weakness. It's courage. And loving someone, even when they betray you, doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. That was the lesson. Not that people will always hurt you, but that sometimes, your greatest strength is walking away without needing to be understood. And leaving behind only the truth. No revenge, no spectacle, just a single line and a photo. And the quiet dignity of someone who finally knew better.